There's something unsettling about the way money behaves in most people's lives. Not random, not chaotic, precise, almost calculated. It comes in, then disappears, not slowly, not gradually, but in a way that feels coordinated. You fix one problem, another appears. You recover from one expense, another replaces it. You increase your income, but somehow your situation doesn't change. And after a while, you stop questioning it. You accept it. You call it life. But what if it's not life? What if it's a system you don't understand? Because there's a pattern that shows up again and again, across countries, across generations, across completely different lifestyles. People who work hard and stay stuck. People who do everything right and still struggle. People who earn more than enough and somehow still lack. That's not coincidence, that's structure. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The real question is not, why don't I have enough? The real question is, why doesn't what I earn stay? Because those are two completely different problems. And most people spend their lives solving the wrong one. They chase income. They chase opportunities. They chase more. But they never stop to ask, what if the issue isn't what's coming in, but what's allowed to remain? There's an ancient idea that has existed long before modern finance, long before salaries, long before markets. It's the idea that provision is not something you create. It's something that flows. And like anything that flows, it can be blocked. Imagine a reservoir, full, endless, pressurized. Now imagine a pipe connected to it. The supply is not the problem. The pressure is not the problem. The source is not the problem. But something inside the pipe is obstructing the flow. So when you turn the tap, you don't get what's available. You get what can pass through. That's the difference most people never understand. They assume scarcity, but what they're experiencing is restriction. And restriction comes from somewhere. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because the blockage is not always outside you. It's not always your job, not always your environment, not always your background. Sometimes it's how you think. Because before money moves in your life, your mind has already decided how much you can hold. If your internal system is built around lack, you will unconsciously maintain lack. You'll hesitate when you should act. You'll doubt when you should decide. You'll shrink when you should expand. And even when opportunity appears, you won't fully take it. Not because you can't, but because something in you doesn't believe it's sustainable. So you sabotage it quietly, subtly, without even realizing it. And then you call it bad luck. But it's not luck, it's alignment. Now here's where ancient wisdom becomes dangerous, because it challenges everything modern thinking assumes. There was a belief that words are not passive. They are not just descriptions. They are not just expressions. They are instruments, tools that shape internal reality, which then determines external outcomes. And there is a specific line that has been repeated for centuries. Most people know it. Almost no one understands it. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. On the surface, it sounds poetic, comforting, spiritual. But originally, it was none of those things. It was a declaration, a statement of position, not I hope I won't lack, not I wish things improve. I lack nothing. That's not emotion. That's authority. It's a refusal to accept lack as a permanent condition, and that shift changes everything, because now you're no longer operating from deficiency. You're operating from alignment, and alignment determines flow. But here's where most people misunderstand this completely. They think saying something automatically changes something. It doesn't. Words without belief are noise. Words without repetition are temporary. Words without action are incomplete. That's why most people try something once, see nothing, and go back to their default thinking. But this isn't about trying. This is about rewiring. Because if your internal system is built on years of scarcity, it will not collapse in one moment. It has to be replaced, slowly, intentionally. And that begins with how you speak. But there's another layer, a deeper one. Because even if you begin to shift your internal state, there's still something most people wait for that they don't need. They wait for conditions to improve. They think, once things settle, then I'll be okay. Once the problems are gone, then I'll receive. Once everything is stable, then things will flow. But that's not how it works. There's a line that reveals something most people overlook. Donna, you prepare a table before me, in the presence of my enemies? Not after, not once everything is resolved. In the presence. That means provision does not wait for perfection. It arrives while pressure still exists, while problems are still visible, while uncertainty is still present. That changes the entire equation. Because now, you don't need to fix everything first. You don't need to eliminate every obstacle. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. You can receive in the middle of imperfection. And that realization alone removes one of the biggest delays in people's lives. But even that is not enough. Because flow doesn't just require alignment. It requires movement. Think about a river. If it has no outlet, it stops. It backs up. It stagnates. Not because the source disappeared, but because the system has nowhere to send it. This is where most people resist the truth, because it contradicts instinct. The key to receiving is giving, not later, not when it's comfortable. First, because giving does something deeper than charity. It breaks the psychology of fear. When you hold on to everything, you reinforce the belief that you don't have enough. When you release something, you interrupt that belief. You tell your system, I am not operating from lack. And that signal changes your behavior. You become more decisive, more open, more aware. And suddenly you start noticing opportunities that were always there. But before, you were too focused on protecting what you had. This is why people who give consistently often experience momentum, not because of luck, but because their internal system is open, and open systems receive more. There's a story about a man who reached a point where he had almost nothing left. No safety net, no margin, no backup plan. And in that moment, he made a decision that didn't make sense. He gave, not because it was logical, but because something in him understood that holding on was not saving him. Shortly after, everything shifted, not slowly, not gradually, rapidly. Opportunities appeared. Support came from unexpected places. Doors opened that had been closed for years. Was it coincidence? Or was the system finally unblocked? Most people will never find out because they will never take that step. They will wait for certainty. They will wait for proof. They will wait for safety. And in doing so, they will remain exactly where they are because this system does not respond to hesitation. It responds to alignment. So here's the structure. Clear, simple, but demanding. First, you declare. You speak as if the condition has already changed, not to convince others, but to reprogram yourself. Second, you see, you visualize provision already present, not someday, now, because your mind follows images. And third, you act, you give, not because you have excess, but because you are creating flow. Declaration, vision, action, 3 parts, 1 system. When they align, something shifts, not always immediately visible, but internally undeniable. The pressure lifts, the fear weakens, the clarity increases, and then the external begins to follow. Not because something new was created, but because something that was already yours finally reached you. Most people will hear this and dismiss it. They'll say it's symbolic. They'll say it's philosophical. They'll say it's optional and nothing will change. But a small number of people will test it quietly, consistently, without needing immediate results. And those people will begin to notice something different. The same environment, the same starting point, but a completely different trajectory because they didn't change their circumstances first. They changed their alignment, and alignment changes outcomes. So the next time money comes in and disappears, don't just look at the numbers, look at the system. Because the issue was never just income, it was flow. And once flow is restored, everything behaves differently. Because the wealth was never missing, it was blocked.